Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 225.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, I have a quickie, a newsletter that I've shared from before from Donna Zajonc and David Emerald. And they are the creators of TED, the empowerment dynamic. And that's all about, if you remember, turning the dreaded drama triangle of persecutor, victim, and rescuer into the empowerment dynamic, TED, of creator, challenger, and coach. And they send out a blog post each week as a newsletter. And it is one that I do tend to read. It's quite short and sweet, and it's usually certainly interesting and sometimes really pertinent. And this particular newsletter caught my eye because it's something that's come up a few times lately in the Fasting Method podcast as I've been editing that. It's also something that we've talked about many times in various guises, the importance of pausing. And this blog post is called Practice the Pause. And they talk about how easy it is to get caught up in the moment and react instinctively to stressors with little conscious thought. And this gets heightened in so many ways, I think. I know I feel like I have a hair trigger separating me from an emotional outburst of some kind when I'm depressed, but there are many examples that I'm sure people can think of immediately. But stress and anxiety are commonplace, aren't they? And are only going to exacerbate the problem. And they go on to talk about what happens when a drama of some kind hits. Most people will seek some relief from the stressors that triggered that reaction. And this is because, and this is something you talk about quite a lot, this is because we are hardwired to soothe discomfort by any means necessary. And there are various ways you might do this, of course. You might withdraw and avoid the situation. You might numb yourself to it. You might get angry and blame others. And these are just some examples of the less effective responses. But they, of course, have a more effective tool that can disrupt this reactive cycle. And I always think of Lila when I hear the word reactive these days, but I should probably also be thinking of myself because it's funny, when I read these articles, I quite often, as you know, relate it back to Lila and dog training, but actually a lot of it relates to me as well. Mm-hmm. I would probably call myself reactive too, especially, like I say, when my mood is depressed, it feels like...
Just not leash reactive.
Yeah, not... Well, I might be if you tried to put me on one. So, never say never. This is where the pause comes in, practicing the pause. Sounds simple, but too simple maybe. Well, they explain briefly why actually it really is very powerful, and it's our good old friend, neuroplasticity. If you practice the pause throughout your day, you are growing new neural pathways in the brain. These new baby neutrons, this is where autocorrect as I call it, has got it wrong. No, it's baby neurons, not baby neutrons. But these new baby neurons, they say, make space for more skillful ways to engage with life. When you stop, breathe deeply, and simply pause, you interrupt your automatic neural pathways that sustained those previous reactions. And the brain commits resources to whatever actions or practices it's doing the most. And this, they say, is key. If you notice a triggering situation and have learned the pause practice, you give your brain a bit of time to shift gears. Your brain has now expanded its capacity to choose how to respond in stressful situations. This new space makes room for the creator wisdom. Remember, their reinterpretation of not reinterpretation, they're changing the dreaded drama triangle, and the creator is key to that. But you're making room for this creator wisdom to emerge and help guide you through difficult moments. And most people, they say, they're always in a hurry, always have a too long to-do list. And we do adapt to that, but at some point we also tend to burn out if we don't take some time out. What they say is what your body really needs is the opposite to always being in a hurry. It needs to slow down to access its wisdom. It needs to slow down to consciously override reactive patterns. And it needs to slow down to allow your defenses to drop. And that always rings a bell in my mind, because I do tend to react defensively. Without a pause practice, it can be difficult to even realize when you're in reactive habits, and they can become so familiar that you no longer even realize they just aren't working for you. So this is the first part, recognizing the patterns. And to do that, you guessed it, you need to pause. Pausing gives you some distance from the troubling thoughts or emotions and helps you separate from them. You are not the thoughts and emotions. And again, this is something we've talked about a lot before, isn't it? It's only when you pause that you can zoom out, see the bigger picture, and realize that danger you thought you were in and needed to react to wasn't such a big deal after all. So they suggest practicing the pause. Pause before making assumptions. Pause before judging. Pause before you say something you will regret. So looping back to what I mentioned at the start, I, just like Lila, do tend to be reactive, especially when I'm stressed. Just like Lila, although probably using slightly different techniques, can't just throw chicken at me. Doesn't work. If I don't do something to reduce that reactivity, it gets worse. Now, this can be tricky, I think, when something like depression increases reactivity, because there's no quick and easy fix to that. You can't just make a blanket reduction to that trigger. But learning and practicing a technique that helps in the moment will help in the moment. But I imagine you'll have something to say about this, I'm sure, should also help overall by reworking those neural pathways. If pausing becomes my go-to response, then what impact might that then have on the bigger picture? And so sort of, trying to help something by coming at it in a slightly different direction. And great example, the morning of writing these notes, getting into a combative conversation with the people who were leaving the dog field before we were due to start, because they did so late, which ate into my time slot. And I am spending a small fortune on dog fields. So I get very irritated if people delay my start time. The outcome of that was basically winding myself up and starting the day on a not great foot, certainly not feeling great. They were very defensive, obviously had no intention of changing their routine, of not leaving on time. So really, what did I gain from that encounter? Certainly nothing good. Keeping it zipped, counting to 10, and taking a few deep breaths probably would have been a much better approach for everyone concerned. I'm sure there's a balance to be had here between learning a pause practice versus maybe learning to speak up for yourself. Depends on the individual and which direction they need to go in. But I suspect actually that adopting a pause practice probably helps everyone, even if it's simply taking a few moments to compose yourself before speaking up for yourself. So there you go. That's a quick one, but for me anyway, quite timely. Because it's funny how these things crop up and then you have an example of it in your day-to-day, or perhaps just something happens and because you've been thinking in that frame of mind, you start thinking about how you can apply it. But yes, I think I need to practice the pause a bit more often. That old adage, isn't it? Count to 10 before you speak.
I wonder if you think about that example, Daisy, of just kind of thinking about what would have happened maybe had you been able to pause. Because I think sometimes when people think of a pause, they think, oh, I'm just delaying doing the same thing. That's not quite what it's for. Or maybe in this example, oh, that's just going to make me not say anything or do anything and just ride it out, which doesn't have to be what the pause does either. So I'm curious, in this example, what would you like that pause to enable you to do?
That's a good question.
This is why I get paid the big bucks here, Daisy, because I ask these good questions.
I think it's a tricky one, that example, which is why I said with hindsight, it would have been better for me to just not look at them. Count to 10, take some deep breaths, just wait for them to get in their car and go away, and then just start 5, 7 minutes late, whatever it was, and just, accept it and move on. Because I didn't actually go into that conversation aggressively. Might have maybe been a bit passive aggressive. But, I think I asked them, oh, hey, are you new? Did you not know that? But, they immediately got very defensive. So I'm not sure there would have been a way I could have engaged in a conversation and it not have an outcome that left a bad taste in your mouth. I think the only outcome would have been, yeah, let's just let it go. It's 5 minutes. It's not the end of the world.
So maybe that's a good example of it. Wasn't that your initial response was in that heated emotional state, which could have been avoided with a pause. But by pausing, you could have kind of just redirected yourself of, it's okay. It's 5 or 7 minutes. Dogs are still going to have a great time here. Just kind of refocusing you rather than getting you out of that emotional response and into a better communication with them. From what you're experiencing, it didn't feel like there was going to be a better way to engage.
Yes, that's very true. I suppose, yes, what you would have done is in that pause is just sort of make the decision, yeah, it's not worth it. Reframe it, put it into, what I mentioned about giving yourself the ability to zoom out big picture. Big picture, does it really matter if we've lost 5 minutes of our time? No, it's not the end of the world. If I still feel annoyed about it when I get home, I can contact the owners of the field if I really want to. But, but I do have that tendency to just get riled up. Sitting there, it's coming up to my time. They're not out the field yet. So, of course, I'm already getting wound up. Well, why aren't they out yet?
Yeah. I think it's a tricky one. Part that's challenging for me, and working on the pause would be really helpful, is at that point, I kind of get to the decision of, am I going to let this affect my cortisol response and all of the resulting minutes and hours after that? Or can I pause and, reframe it like you just did so that I don't get that intense response? Because as you said, having the intense response didn't improve anything in the situation. You didn't teach them a lesson. Like you said, probably won't change their behavior. If they see you, they'll probably wait 5 more minutes to come out next time, But really thinking about, I think where I get caught up is, well, I need to correct the situation. I need to make them know what they're doing wrong. And, that often doesn't lead to any of us feeling any better. But that to me is an example of a time where pausing and coming out of that emotional reaction can be challenging.
Yeah, and it can also, with that particular example, it's a field that I don't actually go to very often anymore. And we only went there because the field that we have started going to was not available. It's not as nice a field. It's nowhere near as big. It's nowhere near as nice. The other one is just so much nicer. And the other one also has a buffer period in between appointments. Whereas this one, they're hour or half an hour slots. And the deal is you have to be out in your car and heading out so that the next person can start their slot on time. But because they run consecutively, that means you have to give up part of your session to allow the next person to start on time. And that's just how their system works. A lot of dog fields work that way, but they should make it clearer that your session basically ends at 5 minutes before. But these people, no, I've paid up until that time when yours starts. Well, yeah, but we can't both be in the field at the same time. So something has to give. Whereas the field I go to, that we mostly go to now, has a 10-minute buffer zone in between. So straight away, you see, you don't have that problem. You get your full time and you have time to get in your car and be gone. Because you don't really want people passing each other, because a lot of people that use these fields use them for a reason, like they have reactive dogs or something. So, you don't want to be passing other dogs, because that just sets you up for a bad time in the dog field. So as you can see, it's something that's quite an integral part of my life, which is another reason why I get easily wound up. So again, it just sort of cemented the decision. Yeah, that's not a dog field we're going to use anymore. Part of the problem goes away. But yeah, I definitely think a pause in the moment. Yeah. Like I say, I get too easily irritated by all those little things that we talked about, spending too long in a queue, or, someone jumping into a queue in front of you, whatever it is. Does it really matter?
Yeah, I guess for me, part of the pause might allow me to shift my drive to correct, to take another approach. Like maybe when I get home, I'll email the owner just to let them know. Some of the other dog fields I go to have a 10-minute buffer, and I have found so far at your place, this might really be helpful. Not demanding it, not coming at it from that emotional place, but I can't get to that rational way of exploring how I want to respond if I don't do the pause.
Yeah, so I suppose maybe having a combination of things. When they say practice the pause and they talk about a deep breath, it's something, because quite often I suppose I'm thinking of it in a situation. Sure, there are other situations we can think about where it's useful to practice the pause, but I'm thinking of it in those situations where I tend to get angry or irritated or frustrated. So, of course, you're already escalating into that emotional state when you're trying to trigger this new reaction, form this new pathway of practicing the pause. But you probably need to do a little bit more than pause, because you started escalating, you need to just bring yourself back down. So it's sort of, right, I need to trigger that pause, but I do need to, count to 10, do my 4 in, 6 out breathing for a couple of minutes, whatever it is. I think, you probably need just a few steps in there. This is only taking, a minute or two, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a big part of, for me, as you were talking about it, I felt myself even do it. The pause is to give myself a chance to slow down my breath, which de-escalates where I'm going emotionally.
Yeah, and you've talked about, haven't you, before, the intentional sigh. It's a good thing to practice. Like I say, it's just something that I suppose it's when you think of it. Who is that there who talks about, you've only got to mention that his niece wanted a pug and he started seeing pugs everywhere. When it comes into the forefront of your mind, you're paying attention to it maybe. But it seems to be something that is coming up a lot in TFM episodes lately. I think it's an episode that, well, I don't know where we are in the timeline, but a brilliant episode with Kimberly. Just a heads up if it's coming up, or maybe it's out, or it's already been out. Like I say, I'm not sure on the timeline, but a really great episode. But she was talking about the importance of pausing sometimes, just taking a pause in your journey. So Yeah, it just seems to be a word and a practice that has cropped up a lot lately. So that's why it caught my eye.
Yeah. I think for so many of us, so many things that you and I have talked about over these past couple of years really rely on this pause. But oftentimes it's the part that we don't talk as much about. But in order to do things differently, in order to interrupt those neural pathways, we need that pause to do it. You know, as we've talked before about distancing ourselves from certain responses, we need to pause to do that. So I think this is a great reminder to return to the basic thing. The pause is necessary in order to do the other strategies or the other skills. You need that moment of pause.
Yeah. And then, like I say, different people have talked about it in different ways, but it's that other thing, isn't it, of just creating a bit of space. And then it's in that space that more productive, creative, they talk about the creator, but creative, more productive things can happen. But you need to provide that space to just change the dynamic a bit. And you can do that by pausing.
I'm just thinking, even an example recently in a large community meeting that I was in, a Zoom meeting, and someone was sharing an example of something that had happened. And quickly, some of us were responding like, oh, I would have done this and I would feel like this and this. And then like 2 minutes later, someone came in and said, you know, is in the chat, but said, oh, here's a great response. But by not pausing, we were all just kind of going, you know, quickly off of our initial response. And that person's response was so perfect. And I thought, yes, this is the value of pausing a little bit, coming out of that emotional place and thinking about how do I best want to communicate what I need this other person to know in this example. And many of us were coming up with things that were a little more heated or derogatory almost, versus this person that just had this really wise thing to say. But it's hard to get to the wise thing without the pause.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking that so often people are wanting to respond before the person's even finished speaking, because something as part of the thing they're saying they've sort of picked up on and are waiting to respond to that before they've actually finished speaking, to get these people jumping on. And so quite often it's not completely relevant because they haven't heard the whole thing that was being said. So yeah, there's a lot of value, isn't there, in just pausing in that kind of example, in a conversational example, making sure, and we talked about this recently, didn't we? And I've forgotten, I can't remember the episode, but that was it, showing that you're listening, really showing that you're listening is really having heard someone sort of reflect back what they've said, showing that you've heard what they've said before you give your response.
Probably the episode when we talked about the Gottmans.
Yes, probably.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that you have reminded us, Daisy, of this, the importance of the pause. I like that, a little bit of alliteration there to kind of emphasize it, the importance of the pause. But that's a helpful reminder to me to give myself that brief interlude before moving into my next response.
Definitely. Okay. Well, until next time, when we will be back with something from you, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everybody.